have impact is the Tripura, and I think he will eat into both BJP votes as well as, of course, the opposition votes.
Will he pull the steam off, the pressure cooker? Does he do that job where the indigenous groups of Tripura are rallying around Tripura, and there is a fair share of vote share that he pulls around 18 to 20% and pulls about 11 seats. So he becomes a contender there. What does he do? Does he join the party that is going to form the government, or does he decide to sit in opposition? It all depends on the results. If the BJP wins clearly, then we'll have to see what happens. Largely in the northeast, what happens is the regional parties back the party which is going to help them at the center. Now, that is a sentiment we've seen in Meghalaya. Let's look at Nagaland right now. How does Nagaland look at this point? Now, Access My India, Zee Matrix, Times Now, ETG, and also Jan Ki Baat, all of them have come out and very clearly said that Nagaland is firmly in the bastion of the BJP plus. So it's very comfortably placed. They're running away with it. The NPF, which used to be formidable at one point in time, seems to be slipping further. The Congress, nowhere. And the others. Now, here again, it's a very, very interesting story. As far as Nagaland is concerned, it's again under Nephew Rio that the BJP has mounted the challenge, and the BJP plus there, if you look at it, NDPP, seem to be very, very comfortable.
Today we'll get the results of the three northeastern states, Nagaland, Meghalaya and Tripura. It's hugely important, particularly for the BJP, because they need to show that this momentum, this electoral momentum is continuing. You got Karnataka coming up next, then you have Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and then of course the big one, like you said, Anand, in 2024. It's going to be one hell of an election ride, not just for the northeast. This has implications for wider political ramifications, but let's see how that story plays out over the next 2 or 3 hours.
Absolutely, and we got all the details here on the magic wall, and of course Alexa is going to get us a lot of the details as the results come in live. Now you've got the counters on the screen. It's like an L. You see that, ladies and gentlemen? So you've got Tripura here, you've got Meghalaya. There you go, that's Meghalaya, and then there is Nagaland here on the screens. Now, there is a reason why the counter is already ticking on Meghalaya and Nagaland. So Nagaland is 1 out of 60 because one of the BJP contestants in that has been elected unopposed. So it's already won for the BJP in Nagaland. Now, they seem to be, the exit pollsters say that they are in comfortable position to win with their allies. Repeat what's going to happen. So for them to come there. In Meghalaya, one of the candidates, there was a demise of a candidate right in the middle of the campaigning polls. So that's why there are no elections there. So out of the 180 seats, we're going to see results for only 178. So 59 in Meghalaya and 1 out of 60 already done. So 179 results is what we're going to see. One is already declared, beg your pardon, and this is 59, and Tripura will be 60. This is a busy morning, ladies and gentlemen, because there is also the G20 summit which is on, and it's happening. A lot of activity in the national capital. So we'll go across there because Maria Shakil along with Siddhant and Abhishek Jha will be joining us live with all the activity from there. So we will be hopping, skipping across multiple dimensions of the newscast, but the focus will always remain the election coverage, the news, that is the result day. What's the story that's going to be stitched? What's the narrative that's going to be stitched? Will the Northeast dictate the tone for the remaining states? All of this is what will be spoken about. Now, as far as the fight that is As far as the fight is concerned, let's try and, before we go down to our reporters, let's try and understand and start from the state which BJP is trying to retain on its own, that is Tripura. It was an amazing story that was scripted, and when they first came to power, uprooting the left, and before we get to Zaka on that, let's try and quickly look at these exit poll numbers. Now the numbers say that the BJP will consolidate, some of them say it won't be a landslide, it will be hung. The Tripura Muta will come into play as the kingmaker. That's what the Times Now, ETG and Jan Ki Baat numbers are saying. But Zee Matrix and Access My India say that the BJP will be comfortably past the halfway number. Zaka, if Tripura is retained by the BJP, and that too comfortably, it's a statement, and at multiple levels, because then this third party which comes in and diffuses the vote share for the opposition. In this case, it would be Pratyodey Burman's Tripura Muta.
So I think one of the fascinating things about the Tripura election is
Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. The Supreme Court today quashed the present system of appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners and ruled that a panel consisting of the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice of India, and the leader of the opposition will make these appointments now. This is quite a departure from the current system where only the elected government decided with no say of the opposition or the judiciary. The order has met with mixed responses, some hailing it for bringing it more transparency and independence into the process by virtue of checks and balances, others criticizing the court for usurping the government's domain and expanding it to others when there is no such provision. The reality is the constitution actually left it to elected governments to formulate a formula for selection and legislate on it. No government since independence has done it. So are the courts just filling the gap left by the governments, or is this a case of pure judicial overreach? Will the union government now bring in a bill on this issue? And where does this latest order, which the centre opposed, land the relationship between the two arms of democracy, a relationship already strained over the collegium system? We'll take those questions to our guests in just a bit. First up, more about the major judgment. A 5-judge constitution bench in a unanimous verdict agreed CEC selection should be in the same manner as the CBI directors. This is what the court also added. CEC election commissioners to be appointed on the advice of a panel. This panel will comprise of the PM, the Lok Sabha leader of opposition and CJI. When there is no leader of Lok Sabha, leader of the single largest opposition party will be part of this panel. The appointment will be done by the President of India. Now, while the court did say that this will continue to hold good only till a law is passed in this regard, it is still seen as a setback for the centre because the court added EC's appointment needs to be insulated from executive interference. So the message is also very clear. The centre had expectedly opposed this petition. This is what their contention was. The judiciary cannot interfere in the selection of the CEC and the election commissioners. Inclusion of CJI in the process would amount to judicial overreach. Inclusion is violation of the separation of powers. They also added court can quash an appointment if an unqualified person is chosen. And the presumption that the inclusion of the judiciary will bring fairness to the process is wholly flawed. This decision of firming up a panel, that too with the inclusion of the CJI, is in stark contrast to the current system. So this is what Article 324(2) of the Indian Constitution says. Election Commission shall consist of a CEC and election commissioners. The CEC shall be appointed by the President. Council of Ministers will aid and advise the President. And the process is to be followed until Parliament enacts a law. So why did the judiciary step into this? There are some other examples from past too when the SC has stepped into the domain of appointments of key positions. In 2019, in the case of the CBI director appointment, for example, the Supreme Court had directed that the tenure should be a minimum of 2 years, not less than 2 years, and the transfer of the director can only happen with the consent of the appointment panel. A year later, in the Enforcement Directorate's director appointment also, the Supreme Court ordered that the director's tenure can be more than 2 years. Earlier in 2006, Supreme Court had directed that state governments can appoint a DGP only from the top 3 senior-most officers, and that DGP should have a fixed tenure of at least 2 years. Now, this decision by the court isn't happening in a vacuum. Immediately, everyone linked it to the debate currently on over judges' appointment and how the Supreme Court has been resisting a debate over how they themselves select judges for high courts and the Supreme Court. There has been this heated executive versus judiciary debate, and where do their powers end? Government, in fact, has called the collegium system court opaque. The centre has made it very clear they do want the NJAC system for appointment of judges to come back, a bill that was passed by Parliament but later struck down by the Supreme Court. Government wants greater say in the appointment of judges, which used to be the norm earlier. On the other hand, the Supreme Court has repeatedly hit back at the government, the centre, for questioning the collegium system. So the big debate that's coming in after the Supreme Court order on the selection of the CEC and the other election commissioners, is this mere plugging of a hole by the courts or judicial overreach?
इलेक्शन कमीशन का इंडिपेंडेंट बजट होना चाहिए, इंडिपेंडेंट सेक्रेटरीट होना चाहिए, रूल मेकिंग पावर होना चाहिए।
क्योंकि आज संस्थाओं पे 360 डिग्री से इस सरकार का प्रहार है, परोक्ष रूप से या सीधे रूप से.
We have to welcome this judgment. In fact, if you see the director, how CBI director has been appointed, this is they are appointed by a high power committee that the executives cannot appoint this important post.
Let's go across to our guest joining us. Amitabh Sidha, Supreme Court lawyer. So is C. Arima Sundaram. Adil Singh Boparai is from the Congress party. The BJP has declined to be part of this panel. Virag Gupta is a constitutional expert and Mohammad Amin is former ECI joint director. I do thank you all for your time. I want to begin with the lawyers on the panel first. C. Arima Sundaram, the question that everybody is asking or debating today, why should this order not be seen as a judicial overreach? Ultimately, such a decision should have come from the parliament and not from the court.
Look, the answer to this is very simple. That this decision was to come about, that this is the movement of the courts over the years is very clear. It was an inevitability. And I'll tell you why. Over the years, the courts have come into trying to form a wide panel away from exclusivity of the executive to appoint so far as key appointments are concerned. So far as the judiciary was concerned, of course, that was taken on the ground that those are judicial appointments, they should be independent of the judiciary, separation of powers. Thereafter, other key appointments like the CBI director and other appointments came up, and again it was felt that there should be a broad-based panel which includes not just the executive alone, that is to say the executive as in the ruling government alone, the ruling dispensation alone, should include the opposition, should include the judiciary. What was to happen with the CEC was but an inevitability, and I'll explain to you exactly why. You see, there are certain appointments which are sheer executive appointments. Let's take appointments like the governor. Let's take appointments like the bureaucrats, the secretaries, the chief secretary, cabinet secretary. These are pure executive appointments. Those are appointments which continue and remain to be entirely within the realm of the executive. There are other appointments like, let's take the CEC, which is really a constitutional appointment which deals with the basic fulcrum of democracy itself and goes to the root of democracy. Same way, the CBI was meant to be an independent agency to do an independent inquiry, more or less in lines with what the FBI in the United States is, and to be independent as an investigative body, able to investigate also into governmental errors. So therefore, the movement of the court has been that in such bodies which don't come solely within the executive realm, like I said, governors, executives, the bureaucracy, chief secretaries, cabinet secretary, the army, etc. When it comes within the realm of the larger constitutional framework, dealing with independent agencies and especially something like the CEC, dealing with the very fulcrum of democracy, the entire basis of democracy rests in the CEC's hands really because of the elections. It was but natural that a panel like this would be suggested by the court. I'm not surprised with it at all. I don't think it is judicial overreach because unless the Constitution expressly covered the issue to such an extent that it was not capable of forming this kind of body, the idea is that, look, let there be such a body. Having said that, I have to point out one caveat.
Okay.
You see, there could be one criticism in that when you have the Prime Minister, which is the leader of the House, you have the leader of the opposition, and you have the Chief Justice of India. Often you're going to have a disagreement between the opposition and the government on the selection. In which case, the final selection boils down to the judiciary. So the judiciary actually becomes the selection, the person who selects. And I think this is where there could be some criticism, saying that is this not becoming really a case where in reality, in factual, practical terms, that the judiciary will be appointing the CEC
as well.
And there could be a criticism there. But so far as the overall concept of having a representative body to decide this, which consists not only of the executive, the ruling dispensation, but includes opposition, includes judiciary, I think conceptually, I think that is correct. And that is the right way to head, unless we're going to appointments which are exclusively within the executive
But here's my
realm,
question,
in
Arima
which case
Sundaram, and I'll take that to Amitabh Sinha. Fundamentally, the issue is not who's on the panel. Fundamentally, the question is who should decide what the panel is and how the selection should happen. Now, you say, rightly so, that the courts have been moving in this direction. But the question I'm asking Amitabh Sinha is this the court's domain in the first place? If the constitution did not assign the court this responsibility and it was the legislature's responsibility to decide this, then why are they intervening in this, rightly or wrongly? Whether we like the outcome is a separate issue. Fundamentally, I'm discussing the separation of powers right now. Amitabh Sinha, on top of that is the inclusion of the CJI, which Arima Sundaram has included in his opening comments, giving virtually the judiciary a veto as to who becomes the CEC. And thirdly is the additional angle that you don't want any interference of a larger group of people when it comes to your own appointment, but you are interfering in all other appointments. Amitabh Sinha.
Thank you, Shivani, for your very intelligent comment, or whatever it may be called, when you were asking question to me. See, I really appreciate the answer given by Mr. Sundaram, my brother. But the important thing here is that what your question was also, that whether it is constitutional, whether it is legal or not. See, the headline of your story also is clearly showing that whether it is judicial overreach or not. See, overreach is a very particular word, and judicial overreach is now very evident, in every, most of the cases where the sensitivity is there or the national issues are there. So my point is, see, in this situation, then the Supreme Court has violated Keshwanand Bharti case. See, the basic structure, the basic fiber of the Constitution is being violated by the Supreme Court itself. So when the Supreme Court is here to look after whether the violation of any system is there or not, Supreme Court has started giving instruction that this type of governance should be there. And the most important thing, Justice Joseph's observation, I know oral observation, certainly it was there, that we need, just Mr. Sessions type of CEC. It means he is directly doubting the integrity of the present CEC. So this is very unfortunate, let me tell you. And what my basic contention of this against this Constitution Constitution bench judgment is that everywhere Supreme Court is trying to put their nose. Supreme Court is trying to decide what exactly is good or bad. But where is the people's mandate? If the government is being chosen by the people's mandate and people is supreme in this country, so judiciary has nothing to do with anything like that. And lastly, see, Mr. Joseph has said that finally the judiciary will decide who will become the CEC. It means his basic hidden message is whether CEC is capable to sack the Prime Minister who is properly elected by the government or not. This is very unfortunate. So it is just like a judicial coup. Let me tell you a very a very strong word against it. This is sort of a judicial coup. So this is nothing but unrequired thing. Why judiciary is behaving in such manner? It means the judiciary or this constitution has no faith in the people's mandate. This is my clear view, and generally what my point is that people in India also are thinking that whether they have voted for a proper government or not because of under the light of this constitutional judgment.
Okay, I will go to Virag Gupta in just a bit, but I do want to bring in Mohammad Amin as well. As a former member of the Election Commission, do you believe that this is a welcome decision or this actually creates any further issues as well?
No, sir, we can welcome the honorable court order and just we can say this was long awaited. And so many times you can see all parties are having hue and cry about this election commission, and they are having the problem with the election commission that they are favoring to the government so many times. And this time Mr. Goel was appointed as an election commissioner. So that was the objection of the Supreme Court. They want to see the file. So the election commission has already sent, the government has, the law ministry has sent already the file to the Supreme Court. But they have found there is nothing against the selection process. But they want to make a their own judgment and they have given the judgment about the selection, how to choose the Chief Election Commissioner. Actually, this is the constitutional body, and the public want to be a good person. But always see, last election commissioners was appointed. So every government, this government or before that government, they have objection. So about the selection of and they are always blaming to the commission that they are favoring to the ruling government. But this is not fair. But we can say this is the good attempt by the Supreme Court has given to the government. They can make a law in the parliament. And
I was going to come to exactly that question. Wouldn't it have been better if the Supreme Court directed the government that please formulate a policy and bring a law on that instead of directly ordering the government that this is what the panel is going to be? Ultimately, the constitution left it to the government. Arima Sundaram is waving his finger. Yes, Arima Sundaram, I'll come to that to you in just a bit. Yes, Mr. Ami.
Legally, I just can say this is a welcome to this is good for the election commission.
Okay. So fundamentally, I want to reiterate, Arima Sundaram, that I am not objecting to the fact that 3 people will decide who the election commissioner is going to be. I think fundamentally, we all look forward to consensus. That's our basic nature, and the more there are checks and balances, I think people feel that there will be greater transparency. But why, the fundamental question that keeps coming back to is whether they should have decided it, but they have left a door open, that this stands only till the government brings in a law. Very quickly, Arima Sundaram, I'll go to our other guests.
You see, why I shook my head earlier was, you said, could the court not have directed the government to pass a law? The answer is no. The court cannot direct the legislature to enact a legislation. That is not possible at all.
But they suggested so in the past to the government. They have made their recommendations in the past to the government.
No. The law, sorry, you are not getting the point. You cannot direct the legislature to pass a law. But where you feel a vacuum exists, it's been held as far back as the Vishaka case and various after. Vishaka was about harassment at the workplace for women and all that. Where the courts find that there is a lacune, the law has been well laid down that the court can lay down guidelines to be followed until there is a legislation.
Okay.
So there can always be a legislation which is brought in, but until then the guidelines can be laid down by the court when the court feels a vacuum needs to be filled in, a situation needs to be addressed.
Okay.
And that's what the court has done here.
All right. Adil Singh, Boparai, I want to come to you. One of the other objections that people are raising is that this whole suggestion, and the government also said this, that this whole suggestion that a process can be free and fair only if a judge is sitting on that process. Even though we are having this debate in the country of what about judges' appointment themselves, don't you think that for anyone in politics, forget about whose government is in power currently, that is a fundamental question to ask. If everything can be fair only when there is a judicial oversight, then how do we do so many things in our country that don't mandate a judicial oversight?
The objections to this historic judgment are preposterous. And it only reflects a lack of understanding of our revered constitution. Free and fair elections is part of the basic structure of the constitution. And a system of checks and balances ensures that the arbiter to our elections is a person who is non-partisan. I think this is the rationale behind the Supreme Court judgment. And now coming to India 2023, today, you are witnessing an onslaught on institutions by a majoritarian government. You cannot have the executive ride roughshod over institutions just because they have a majority in parliament. We're a country which is a constitutional democracy governed by the rule of law. Merely because you are in the majority does not automatically mean that you're right. And the constitution is what the judiciary interprets the constitution to be. And finally, I don't understand what is the difficulty with transparency.
Then why not the collegium? That's what people are asking. Why don't we need greater transparency in the collegium, for example, then? This is the obvious question that everybody is asking.
Again, this is what I said earlier. People who are raising objections are reflecting and demonstrating a lack of understanding. There is consultation in the process of appointment of judges. Once the High Court Collegium makes a recommendation, the name goes to the Law Ministry. The name is vetted by the Intelligence Bureau. The government can give its inputs. The government can return the names. The problem today is people today are relying upon WhatsApp information.
No, but it's not the same
And
as
that
a
is
panel.
unfortunately molding their opinion.
No, but Adil, to be fair, it's not the same as a panel where everybody is going to have a vote. It's not quite the same.
Let me reiterate again, since you put a question about the judiciary. I again reiterate that the collegium system involves and entails a consultation method with the government for the process of appointment of judges.
Fair enough.
I don't want to repeat it again and again. But coming to the moot point, today you're witnessing an onslaught of institutions. Hence, it is important that you have a collegium or a body of persons electing somebody as critical as an election commissioner. In fact, the Congress party will go one step further. Today, the need of the hour is to even have the process of appointing the director of the Enforcement Directorate through a collegium.
Okay.
Because today, institutions and investigating agencies have become an extension of the government of the day. And I say this in national interest.
No, actually, I repeat myself one more time. I think the issue is not so much if there should be a consultation. First of all, consultation and a panel are two different things. But even if you were to have a panel, I don't think the objection is to that alone. The objection is who should it come from? The judiciary or the legislature, the parliament, which is the will of the people. I go across to Virag Gupta now, constitutional expert. Where do you stand on this? We haven't heard from the government just yet. We haven't heard from the BJP, that is the power at the center, that is in power at the center. But could this fall under the realm of judicial overreach or not?
This is a welcome judgment and I don't feel that it's a judicial overreach. Whatsoever you have discussed, I will reply all those points in one line, 5 points, what other guests were speaking. Number one, Mr. Sinha said that this is some judicial overreach or some separation of power in the Keshwan and Bharti matter. Now, I personally feel when the governments are failing, even all the reforms are coming because of judiciary only. This CBI reform also came because of the Supreme Court judgment in the Vineet Narayan, then CVC Act came, then Lokpal Act came. So, this is a welcome judgment which is good for the democracy because elections are the key to the democracy, and Article 324 talks about superintendence, direction and control of the Election Commission. So, Election Commission has to be free and fair. So, that is the first point. Regarding second point, that filling the gap of the Article 324(2), what learned senior advocate Sundaram Saab was saying, that this is like Vishakha and other guidelines. So I humbly disagree with him. This is not a guideline like Vishakha. This is a judgment and which is binding as per Article 141 of the Constitution. So guidelines are many times can be ignored, and guidelines are meant for general guidelines. But this is a judgment because it was required, because CBI thing came by some Lokpal Act in 2013. So ideally it should have been done by the Parliament, but after the Supreme Court judgment, it is good that as soon as Parliament comes with a law explaining all those things, so that judicial overreach aspect should be over.
But can I ask you a follow-up question? You said elections are the most important thing, and we all agree to that. The fundamental point is again that only. If you don't like, you're saying governments are failing. If people don't like a government, they vote them out. But that does not mean that we start being run by courts in a quasi manner. That's the point.
No.
What is the government's job? The government has to do. If they're failing, they'll be voted out. We cannot quite, as citizens, sit in judgment of a Supreme Court order because we don't have any powers in that domain. But when it comes to a government act, the citizens have power. Yes.
Separation of power also means that all the agencies, all the constitutional bodies should be independent. They should not be the pocket agencies of any government, whether Congress, BJP or whatsoever may be. So if selection process is being defined by the Supreme Court is not saying, and it is wrong to observe that finally the judgment will be by the Chief Justice. Because ultimately they are saying that there should be a due selection process. So defining the selection process, I don't feel that this is a judicial overreach.
Okay.
there is one problem, because normally PILs and such type of petitions goes to the Chief Justice Court, and if Chief Justice is part of the panel, selection panel, and if he is the part of the selection panel, then how will they hear the matters which are arising from any order passed by the election commissioner? So normally in such type of things, there should be provision, like it has been done in the CBI matter also, that Chief Justice or the person nominated by the Chief Justice. That is the third point.
Okay.
Now the fourth point is that government has said in the Supreme Court that if some wrong selection is done, then it can be quashed by the Supreme Court. I don't agree, because once election commissioner is appointed and Chief Election Commissioner has the status of the former judge, so Supreme Court judge, so they can only be removed as per the impeachment process. By this judgment, other two election commissioner has also got the same status, but once they can remove by the due process, so I don't think that Supreme Court can, because in this matter also, one election commissioner was appointed in the lightning speed as observed by the Supreme Court.
Okay, fair enough. I'm running out of time.
Not,
I'll just give Amitabh Sinha the final 30 seconds. Should the government now bring in a law, and ultimately is the executive or the legislature paying the price that they didn't formulate a policy on this? They should have done it, as the Constitution said.
Shivani, my basic very first problem or the objection with this judgment is, see, Supreme Court or the Judiciary has the power to evaluate the entire election process through election laws. Election petitions are the direct jurisdiction of Judiciary.
Right.
So they don't have the confidence on themselves also, and they are saying, and they are not able to shorten the time limit for the election petitions, and they are trying to intervene and interfere in the executive. This is really a very wrong precedence is being set. So my point is that this should not be done. Transparency in judiciary is also required. And every time my fellow panelists, they are saying that CBI is not a constitutional body.
Right.
The Election Commission is a constitutional body, and they are interfering in the appointment of constitutional body.
So what should the government do now? Amitabh Sinha, what do you think the government should do now? Should they challenge this?
If the makers of constitution were not ready about, clear about this, you are trying to say that the makers of the constitution were not clear about that. They have given this entire process in the hands of executive.
Exactly.
So I think the government should certainly not act as per this thing, and a law should be enacted so that this overreach should not be
I'll leave it at that. Fundamentally, there is a constitutional provision on this. If there was a gap, then it should be filled by the parliament, which is the will of the people. If the constitution needs to change or be amended or updated, there is a body, which is the parliament, that should do that. Those changes should not come from other bodies and other arms of democracy, is the point fundamentally that everyone has been left thinking about as far as this order is concerned. I thank our learned guests for joining us and appreciate your time. I'm slipping into a very short break. On the other side, we'll get you some updates from the G20 summit happening in the national capital. Also, the Prime Minister is set to speak in a bit from now at the Raisina Dialogue. Stay with us.
That the BJP will retain the state and retain it rather comfortably. Remember, the halfway mark is 30 plus 1. So if they are going to retain the state anywhere in these numbers, whether it's the Axis numbers or whether it is the Z numbers or the Jan Ki Baat numbers, then you're pretty much looking at a kind of majority that the BJP had last time around. And remember, this is a state where they changed the chief minister, much like they did in Uttarakhand, much like they've done in other states. So that will be a strategy that could get some validation if these numbers hold and if the BJP comes back in the same ballpark as it won last time. Two factors, like I said, before I give it to you. One is this party, can they emerge kingmaker, particularly in the tribal districts? Will they eat into either the BJP votes? Remember, the BJP won big time the tribal votes in 2018, also because of the alliance with the IPFT. And left in Congress for the first time, remember, these were the traditional parties in Tripura. For the last 30-40 years, the contest was always between left and Congress until the BJP came to the scene 5 years ago and stole the show. Now, left and Congress are together, Arithmetically, it may be a formidable alliance, but elections don't always work on arithmetic.
For the left and Congress to come together, one wonders what the compulsions, political compulsions have been, that in just about 5 to 6 years or inside a decade, these two arch rivals have actually come together. The Trinamool has also tried to make inroads, but they don't seem to be getting much there. And
so far, I think almost all the polls are saying either between 0 or 3, 1. And I think that's because there's already a third player in Tripura. Unlike in Meghalaya, where the TMC is also contesting there they might have a little more impact than in Tripura. But I think in Tripura, the third player who could have impact is the Tripura Mota. And I think he will eat into both BJP votes as well as, of course, the opposition votes.
Will he pull the steam off, the pressure cooker? Does he do that job where the indigenous groups of Tripura are rallying around Tripura Mutta, and there is a fair share of vote share that he pulls around 18 to 20% and pulls about 11 seats. So he becomes a contender there. What does he do? Does he join the party that is going to form the government, or does he decide to sit in opposition? It all depends on the results. If the BJP wins clearly, then we'll have to see what happens. Largely in the northeast, what happens is the regional parties back the party which is going to help them at the center. Now, that is a sentiment we've seen in Meghalaya. Let's look at Nagaland right now. How does Nagaland look at this point? Now, Access My India, Zee Matrix, Times Now, ETG, and also Jan Ki Baat, all of them have come out and very clearly said that Nagaland is firmly in the bastion of the BJP plus. So it's very comfortably placed. They're running away with it. The NPF, which used to be formidable at one point in time, seems to be slipping further. The Congress, nowhere. And the others. Now, here again, it's a very, very interesting story. As far as Nagaland is concerned, it's again under Nephew Rio that the BJP has mounted the challenge, and the BJP plus there, if you look at it, NDPP, seem to be very, very comfortable.
Today we'll get the results of the three northeastern states, Nagaland, Meghalaya and Tripura. It's hugely important, particularly for the BJP, because they need to show that this momentum, this electoral momentum is continuing. You got Karnataka coming up next, then you have Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and then of course the big one, like you said, Anand, in 2024. It's going to be one hell of an election ride, not just for the northeast. This has implications for wider political ramifications, but let's see how that story plays out over the next 2 or 3 hours.
Absolutely, and we got all the details here on the magic wall, and of course Alexa is going to get us a lot of the details as the results come in live. Now you've got the counters on the screen. It's like an L. You see that, ladies and gentlemen? So you've got Tripura here, you've got Meghalaya. There you go, that's Meghalaya, and then there is Nagaland here on the screens. Now, there is a reason why the counter is already ticking on Meghalaya and Nagaland. So Nagaland is 1 out of 60 because one of the BJP contestants in that has been elected unopposed. So it's already won for the BJP in Nagaland. Now, they seem to be, the exit pollsters say that they are in comfortable position to win with their allies. Repeat what's going to happen. So for them to come there. In Meghalaya, one of the candidates, there was a demise of a candidate right in the middle of the campaigning polls. So that's why there are no elections there. So out of the 180 seats, we're going to see results for only 178. So 59 in Meghalaya and 1 out of 60 already done. So 179 results is what we're going to see. One is already declared, beg your pardon, and this is 59, and Tripura will be 60. This is a busy morning, ladies and gentlemen, because there is also the G20 summit which is on, and it's happening. A lot of activity in the national capital. So we'll go across there because Maria Shakil along with Siddhant and Abhishek Jha will be joining us live with all the activity from there. So we will be skipping across multiple dimensions of the newscast, but the focus will always remain the election coverage, the news, that is the result day. What's the story that's going to be stitched? What's the narrative that's going to be stitched? Will the Northeast dictate the tone for the remaining states? All of this is what will be spoken about. Now, as far as the fight that is As far as the fight is concerned, let's try and, before we go down to our reporters, let's try and understand and start from the state which BJP is trying to retain on its own, that is Tripura. It was an amazing story that was scripted, and when they first came to power, uprooting the left, and before we get to Zaka on that, let's try and quickly look at these exit poll numbers. Now the numbers say that the BJP will consolidate, some of them say it won't be a landslide, it will be hung. The Tripura Mutta will come into play as the kingmaker. That's what the Times Now, ETG and Jan Ki Baat numbers are saying. But Zee Matrix and Access My India say that the BJP will be comfortably past the halfway number. Zaka, if Tripura is retained by the BJP and that too comfortably, it's a statement and at multiple levels, because then this third party which comes in and diffuses the vote share for the opposition. In this case, it would be Pratyodey Burman's Tripura Mota.
So I think one of the fascinating things about the Tripura election is, last time the BJP came from behind and surprised everyone with not just, dislodging 30 years of left rule. Manik Sarkar's rule was dislodged, but they got a big win. They got 44 out of 60. That was a 2/3 majority. So to be able to retain a state like that with a similar kind of a majority, if you were to go by the Axis My India poll, they will be in that same ballpark. The only poll which is saying it will be a hung house and the Tripura Mota will come into play is the ETG poll. But all the other polls are saying that the BJP will retain the state and retain it rather comfortably. Remember, the halfway mark is 30 plus 1. So if they are going to retain the state anywhere in these numbers, whether it's the Axis numbers or whether it is the Z numbers or the Jan Ki Baat numbers, then you're pretty much looking at a kind of majority that the BJP had last.
Welcome back. Let's get you some updates. Both sessions of the G20 foreign ministers meet concluded a short while ago. A bulk of issues were addressed. Broadly, a consensus was built. Remember, the Prime Minister set the stage of the G20 meetings today by really putting out the statement that multilateralism is in crisis today. There was one sticking point, which was Ukraine, of course, which is why there's not going to be any joint communication from the foreign ministers of these countries regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has lashed out at the West for stalling negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Bilateral meets were also on the agenda. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar held bilateral talks with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, focusing on bilateral ties and pressing global issues, including the Ukraine conflict. Jaishankar also met, importantly, China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang, who's on his first trip to India. The India-China meeting holds immense significance in the wake of the continuing military standoff between the two sides in Ladakh at the line of actual control. The discussions were focused on addressing these current challenges to the bilateral relationship. On the other hand, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is also in India for the 8th edition of the Raisina Dialogues. She hailed Prime Minister Narendra Modi, saying that he is one of the most loved leaders globally. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to inaugurate India's flagship event of geopolitics in just a bit. But before that, some statements by the foreign ministers.
We spent, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes talking to each other. And the bulk of our conversation, understandably, was about the current state of our relationship. There are real problems in that relationship that need to be looked at, that need to be discussed very openly and candidly between us.
We can see that the West is continuing with other ways under new conditions. They are still promoting their interests without considering the interests of the vast majority of other stakeholders of the global community, and the developing countries can see it for what it is. I have already touched upon this matter, the colossal, boorish moral pressure. Yes, some of them, when such pressure is exerted against them, they are saying certain things or they're voting in certain manner to relieve themselves a little bit from the pressure from the United States and their allies.
I want to go across first to my colleague Siddhant, who's been tracking developments from the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan. Siddhant, importantly, India-China foreign ministers talk. This is extremely important in the climate that it is coming. Tell us more of what has come out from that meeting.
Well, yes, the bilateral talks between the foreign ministers of two nations did take place on the sidelines of G20 summit, and perhaps one of the most important meeting which happened on the sidelines of G20, reason being that both the foreign ministers met for a longer time, and in fact the border issue was raised during the meeting, and that was also officially conveyed to the press, that the border issue was raised. At the same time, several issues related to G20 were raised in the meeting. So India has again made its stand clear. Irrespective of what Chinese have to say on the bilateral relations between the two nations, India has made its stand clear that if they want any solution to the recent escalation in relationship, then for that they need to first discuss the border issue. And this is perhaps the reason that even today, when the photograph of the two ministers were put out on Twitter, then the caption it was clearly written that border issues was discussed. So sending out a clear message to China from New Delhi that border issue is a priority for India. Whereas China believes that if India wants a solution to the recent escalation, then they should give away the geopolitical confrontation and should address other important issues. So this
Siddhant,
has
I'll
been
keep coming
China's
back
stand.
to you. These are live visuals that are now coming in from the Raisina Dialogues happening from today for the next couple of days. The Prime Minister has arrived. He's expected to inaugurate and speak. Already in the morning, the Prime Minister has made a very important statement as far as the current global climate is concerned at the start of the G20 summit, which India is hosting. And his message has been very clear that, the world needs to do more. Post the World War II, countries came together so that they don't see conflicts anymore. But we live in a very conflicted world today. Also, multilateralism has come under question. That's the Prime Minister
of India,
in company with the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. We'll keep an eye on those visuals. We'll go across to the Prime Minister when he's speaking. But let me also bring in the guest who's joining us, Foreign Affairs expert. Okay, all right.
A very, very warm welcome to the Raisina Dialogue. This edition of the Dialogue is special. It is the first dialogue in India's Amrit Kal, or Golden Age, an epoch marking the 25 years leading up to a century of India's independence, when colonial rule left our country starving of resources. It could not shackle the hopes and dreams of 1 billion people. Today, those aspirations remain alive, and 75 years that passed have led to this very moment of resurgence.
All right. We'll just go across to the Raisina Dialogues as the Prime Minister begins his speech. Rabindranath Sachdev, Foreign Affairs expert, is also joining us on the show. How crucial do you see what is turning out to be a standoff of sorts when it comes to the Ukraine issue? Russia, possibly China on one side and the rest of the global world on the other side. And then, India is hosting this summit in this climate. There's been friction in the past, even in the present meeting. Is there any danger that Ukraine may completely derail the G20, other issues and summit-related concerns?
Thank you so much. Yeah, if not a danger, Ukraine will play the role of a catalyst. I think, see where the world of today is, as Prime Minister has said, there's a global breakdown happening. That reality has to seep into everyone. And this is being precipitated definitely by the Ukraine crisis. Minus the Ukraine crisis also, already the world was shifting and moving away. The Euro-Atlantic Center and their regime and their worldview was, the center of gravity of the world about 80 years ago was different. The center of gravity of the world now is much more distributed across the world. That reality has to set in. And multilateral organizations, especially the UN, have really failed to prevent conflicts the world over.
Yeah. So the PM has been very categorically very critical of the UN in the past, even in his speech at the UNGA. And now today on multilateralism, what do you think is his key point is? Because I think the Indian message has been for quite a while that you need to divide decision making properly amongst countries like India. And it cannot be a cohort of some.
Oh, absolutely so. But you see, the unfortunate thing is there can never be a reform of the UN. I don't think the UNSC can ever be reformed. Nobody will give up their veto and nobody will want other people into the tent. What could be done, should be done, maybe be done, is to create another organization, a tribunal, focused on preventing conflicts all over the world. That could be something which could become, see, right now, we are in a way, like a critical mass in physics or a tipping point. The world is at that tipping point. At this tipping point, it is good that, we are not able to issue the joint communique. Let the differences come up. Why sweep them under? What's been happening so far? Any differences and all papered over in diplomatic wordsmithery. The reality of the world is that the challenges which are there, the pains which different nations are facing are or cannot be papered over. They're real challenges.
And in fact, I was going to ask you exactly this. What do you make of the Russian response after the finance ministers meeting also, and during the external affairs ministers meetings also? Russia has been very categorical that the Western powers are abusing this platform to corner it.
No, certainly. I mean, Russia is categorical. Russia is saying it, and the Western powers are doing it. There's no doubt to it, right? But Russia made the mistake that it invaded. It picked up the weapon the first time, right? The first shot which was fired was by Russia. That's Russia's mistake and what's going on. But the build up to it, to create the conditions which kind of, I would not say compelled, but due to which Russia thought it needed to pick up the weapon, are or were created by the US and NATO without doubt. Big picture.
Yeah.
Now, Russia is saying it clearly. There is China, there is India. So the world is getting much more distributed in terms of the power centers. And what is happening is the US, by the way, Europe has gotten even more stronger due to the Ukraine war, more solidified. Our European values, you would hear the rhetoric coming often, right? Now, the US aims to be the solo superpower, which could be fine, and it wants to prevent China. Now, we have our own issues with China also. So there's a, kind of a alignment to our interests. But if you look at the bigger global picture, in this global picture, there is no other way, and nobody is ready to live and let live.
Can I ask you,
that is the paradigm
in such a climate, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, so much pressure was mounted on India in the initial months. It has continued in some form or the other. India had stood fast as far as its outlook is concerned. No compromise on its own national interest. Rest, of course, India stands for peace. That has been the message. But India is also not very willing to take any additional burden of the conflict on it, because we frankly have nothing to do with it. We have got our relationships with Russia. We're not going to throw them into the, into the gutter because of this. Overall, do you think India has managed this extremely well? And even the Western powers are beginning to realize that best they can hope for is that India mediates. India is not going to give an inch as far as its own interests are concerned.
Very interesting question. I would say that, when the war started, it was the first thing. It was something happening for the first time with everyone, right? Even with India, we were a new dynamic out there. So the first few months, we were wanting to stay on the sidelines, not get involved in anything. We wanted to wish it away, right? But yes, we did face pressure from the West and the US. And yes, we did, in fact, hold 3 contracts to to Russia under American pressure in August of last year, or I think March, April. State Department official testified to the US Congress. The congressman asked, India is our friend, official Donald Lu, the famous Donald Lu, right? He said, we understand India's legacy and relations and all, but India is coming around. They paused one order for MiG aircrafts upgrades, 2.1 billion, which is still pending, by the way. They paused order on helicopters, and there was one more. So these were 3 orders which we put on pause. But later on, I think we fine-tuned our stance, and we got our logic very nicely, very correctly, which Minister Jaishankar started, articulating in the world forums that, you cannot be looking at the world only through the European lens. I mean, our problems are also there. It's not only your problems. You're not the center of the world, right? And then when Prime Minister in Samarkand with Putin said, the words that this is not an era of war.
Right.
I think India's diplomacy and our stance evolved, matured, and now the West is realizing, yes, that, and the US, that India will tread its own path. But no matter that, behind the curtains, we are facing questions. We are being pressed to take or to downgrade our relations with Russia. So there's no doubt on that. And of course, we'll also have to look long term. You see, very selfishly, in a way speaking, Russia has been a great friend, but if you see Russia's performance, the performance of the military industry has been disappointing, to say the least, perhaps, right?
Okay.
For whatsoever
Can I
reason.
ask you a
Plus,
broad,
if this
overall question? You know, I must add a caveat that all of this power and the stance and the, you know, backbone that India is showing also comes from the fact that it is possibly the only bright spot as far as global economy is concerned. And it is using that heft. Ultimately, diplomatic heft comes from economic heft. So we must focus on that. But overall, you know, the world is looking with more respect, especially at the time when India is heading the G20 and hosting the presidency. Do you think that the outlook towards India from some of the traditional global powers has indeed fundamentally shifted?
Oh, yes, I do think so. And you're absolutely right. You know, it's our economic heft, it's our people, what we have in India as such, and our trajectory which is going. And also remember, India is not so much an export-driven totally economy like China was.
Yeah.
China grew fantastic, but it was all export-driven. India is very much a domestic market economy also. So that rise of India is absolutely, I mean, if we were a Paraguay or a Uruguay or a, you know, small nation, no matter what our ancient legacy, no matter what,
people wouldn't care. That's the reality as far as diplomacy is concerned. Rabindranath, I request you to stay with me. I want to go across to my colleague Abhishek Jha, who's also tracking more of what has happened as far as the G20 front is concerned and what's expected, for example, from the Raisina Dialogue. Everybody very keenly waiting for the Prime Minister's speech, especially after the stage that he has set, Abhishek, in the morning. Saying that multilateralism is in crisis. The world needs to wake up and look at the challenges it's facing. Give us a sense of how the day was at the G20 today. What were the highlights?
So clearly, the day started with Prime Minister's message that the world is at a crossroads where multilateral organizations, especially United Nations, has been failing time and again. He counted the recent developments or recent crises that the world has seen: pandemic, climate change, Russia-Ukraine war, food crisis, fuel crisis. And these are the fundamental aspects of the world, where the United Nations was mandated to deal with them and to keep them under control. But clearly, United Nations has not been able to deal with this crisis. So there should be a representation from other countries or other members of United Nations in a big way, where they can reflect the reality of the changing times. We know that India at the time of formation of United Nations was not on a very good space, but now India is the fourth or fifth largest economy. It has world's largest population. The strategic importance of India being in Asia is very important. It is world's largest market where every investing country is eyeing a good share. So clearly, a country like India should get a more prominence at United Nations and other multilateral organizations. So that was a sense that Prime Minister tried to convey to the state members.
Abhishek, I request you to just stay with me. Let me take a final comment from Rabindranath Sachdev as well. Overall, what would India and the global community hope to achieve from these G20 meetings today? At least a bare minimum that you think should happen.
I think what we should hope to achieve is, something which we have in this thing, Manthan. And, after that Manthan, the essence which comes out, the raw essence of the reality, of the new reality of the world, I think should come out. It would hit everybody in the sense that, they would realize that the world has changed, there are new dynamics, and the world has to shift gears. I think that's going to be the clear-cut message takeaway from these 2 days also. And going up to the G20 leaders meeting, there could be some things, etc., because this realization has come up now. It's precipitating. The world cannot go on like this. The world organizations in charge of, or so to say, for preventing conflict and all, are absolutely, toothless. So why not maybe let the UN be, UNSC be, why not create a separate tribunal commission or something which looks and which is having a partnership or a composition of all the new reality of this world.
Okay.
So that some challenges can be addressed. Otherwise, all of these nations are walking their own music to their own drums, and we are heading for conflicts and conflicts and conflicts.
Okay. The Italian Prime Minister is speaking. Let's listen in.
Inaugurate this year's Raisina Dialogue. and to do so in front of such an extraordinary audience, an audience that includes representatives from across the G20, with whom Italy shares a special responsibility to find solutions to our common global challenges. With this in mind, well, I would like to take this opportunity to share my appreciation for Prime Minister Modi's hard work on handling a complex presidency and to reiterate Italy's full support to its success. I am told that the name of this international conference comes from Raisina Hill here in Delhi, from which the government is granted a broader view of India's capital city. In troubled times like today, this is, I think, a fitting metaphor of the vision that we as leaders, thinkers, civil servants need to adopt. It reminds me of the Palatino, the Campidoglio, and the other hills on which our ancestors founded ancient Rome more than 2,000 years ago, from which an extensive network of roads connected different provinces, leading from the center of the Italian peninsula to very diverse cultures. And I think that it is also the way we need of doing politics today. When I was running for the electoral campaign, I said that I didn't want to climb the institutions to gain power. I wanted to climb the institution, for it is the only way that you can have a better view of what is happening and give best solutions. And that is exactly what I see today. As we look at events around us, our identity shapes our field of vision, both as individuals and as nations. Identity is shaped deeply by geography, and at the same time, our thoughts could be shaped by provocation. Here I would like to try to interpret in a positive way the very interesting question posed by the organizers of this conference. And I will start from the word provocation, which could certainly be considered as an affront to our sensitivities, but also as a spur to think in a different way. A challenge to accept the challenges of uncertainty and turbulence. For nothing is more certain than the uncertainty of our historic times. This is definitely the era of uncertainty, and at the same time, a period of unprecedented.
You're watching News Epicenter with me, Maria Shakil. It is a saffron storm in the Northeast, ladies and gentlemen, where the BJP-led Northeast Democratic Alliance, that is NEDA, has once again shown the electoral power of brand Narendra Modi.